Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at some of the social and economic costs and benefits of inequality. You need to be aware of both social costs and benefits of equality as well as economic costs and benefits of equality, or the opposite of inequality. These are also on page 13 and 14 of your notes on the Google Drive. So in terms of the social costs of inequality, these costs relate to generally people living without being able to afford a dignified standard of living. So there can be helplessness and despair caused by people living in absolute and relative poverty, and that can cause increased incidence of mental health problems. It can also lead to more social unrest, so people feel more marginalised or outcast from society because they don't really have the means to support themselves, and they also therefore more susceptible to being involved in crime. So crime rates can often go up when there's more inequality. It can lead to conspicuous consumption. So what I mean by that is that people will spend more than they can afford to try and signal their wealth to other people, with the idea that this will sort of give the perception that they have more wealth than they actually do have, and therefore that can lead to problems with high levels of debt and things like that. It can lead to more wealth inequality, and that leads to inequality of opportunity. So the more income that people generate, they can generally build up their wealth, because they can save or they can invest it in shares and property, which generally increase in value over time. So wealth inequality is even more uneven than income inequality. And lastly, poverty can lead to a sense of sort of guilt or helplessness for middle and high income households. So that's what we're talking about, is the perception, sort of impact in the non-material living standards of wealthy people, because they see incidences of poverty in the streets and things like that, and that can give them a sense of feeling of guilt. It's probably not as important as some of the other ones, but it is another social cost of inequality. In terms of economic costs, the increased crime rates can occur because of the increased inequality, can then have problems for Australia in terms of a lack of tourism. So less people want to come here on holidays because of high rates of crime. That can then lead to reduced aggregate demand because there's less exporting, and reduce our economic growth going forward. It can also cost the government money, so the more inequality is, the more that taxpayers have to fund welfare for recipients that are on unemployment benefits. That can then flow on to increased taxes for the rich, and even larger, bigger budget deficits as well. So it can have significant cost to the government in terms of funding the welfare of these citizens, which can then flow on to increased deficits. It can also cost the government because they have to spend money on crime prevention ads and health ads to try and combat some of the problems associated with high rates of crime, people not having access to basic health, and then that can lead to spending cuts in other areas. So it can have economic costs to the government in terms of more welfare and more money spent in other areas. Cost to economic growth of inequality might be that low-income earners generally have a greater propensity to spend. So if we're shifting money away from low-income earners to high-income earners, then it should reduce aggregate demand, because the high-income earner is less likely to spend the money. So the more even the distribution of income should have beneficial impacts for aggregate demand, because low-income earners are more likely to spend that additional money. And another economic cost, besides the cost of the growth in the government, is the lost satisfaction from the law of diminishing returns. What we mean by that is that generally a high-income earner will value the money they receive less, and therefore by making it more even or more equitable, you're maximising the total satisfaction that people are getting, because by giving or taking from the rich and giving to the poor, they're going to get more satisfaction than the rich from that. In terms of social benefits, so you also need to be aware of the social and economic benefits of inequality. In terms of the social benefits, the idea is that with the pursuit of wealth and the pursuit of being able to generate a higher income when there's more inequality, it can lead to people being more motivated to be creative and entrepreneurial. So with the hope of increasing their income and wealth over time, it should have a higher prevalence of doctors, entertainers, sports people, scientists, because they're trying to, if they have that incentive of the higher incomes from doing these professions, that will then flow on to improve the quality of life of others, because entertainers keep people happy, people benefit from having more doctors within society, and so on and so forth. So one social benefit is the increase in entrepreneurialism and the increase in creativity, which can then flow on to benefits for other people. The pursuit of greater income and wealth also provides people with a constant feeling of progression or satisfaction. So because of their increased wealth, they have those feelings associated with accumulating wealth, which can often make people feel happy and more satisfied. In terms of economic benefits of inequality, they generally stem from people willing to be more efficient and willing to work harder. So it can lead to increased quality of the labour force. So as individuals get a greater incentive to gain an education, this can lead to them providing better skills, increased entrepreneurialism and increased productivity through those higher skills. So the quality of the labour force can improve purely based on labour becoming more productive as a result of having that increased incentive to generate skills and an education. It can also improve the quality of the capital stock, so not just the quality of labour, but the quality of capital, and that's because entrepreneurs will constantly be seeking to make new profits. So for example, this is like if you lower the company tax rate, they're more likely to invest in new technologies, better equipment, more innovative ways to do things. And this provides benefits for the economy because it boosts our productive capacity, it leads to lower production costs, potentially lower prices and better quality goods and services. So the economic benefits stem from improving the quality of the labour force and improving the quality of capital stock going forward. Negatives of inequality, and I'll just summarise these really quick because this is what we've talked about. Okay, it can lead to less social cohesion, underproduction of socially desirable goods, so there can be underproduced necessities if we have too much inequality. It can also undermine productivity if there's too much inequality because people have less education, so you could argue that that leads to negatives for productivity. Even though there's the benefits, there's the negatives because you have more wasted resources and more labour resources that are unable to contribute productively to the production process. In terms of positives of inequality, increased incentive to work hard, increased incentive to get skills and education, increased incentive for businesses to take risks and be entrepreneurial, which we talked about. It also promotes increased savings for future investment. So rich people are more likely to save, and that can help to create investment as well because they have a pool of savings to draw upon. So finally, in terms of the problems for the economy of productivity falls, so if we have too much equality and that leads to people not working as hard, that can lead to lower levels of productivity, which leads to higher production costs, which can lead to higher prices and inflation. So the idea is that if people don't have that incentive to gain new skills because they're going to get the extra profits from that, then that may lead to higher production costs for the economy. And that can flow on to higher inflation, which leads to reduced international competitiveness because our prices are too high, and that can hurt economic growth and demand as well. So a decrease in exports may then lead to the total value of what we import being higher than what we export, and that can have problems for our level of debt as well. So we need to make sure that the higher rates of productivity exist and that our tax system encourages productivity so that we don't suffer some of these problems, including a reduced aggregate demand. Summary, some inequality provides some economic benefits for a country, but we need to be careful to make sure it's not too great. The government aims for an optimal level of inequality where the benefits just outweigh the costs. Any movement from the optimal level of inequality will start to deteriorate living standards, and we generally aim for around 0.3 to 0.4 on the Gini coefficient.